Well, joining us now from London, CNN's international diplomatic editor, Nick Robertson, and political analyst, James Boyes. Good to see you both. So, Nick, let's start with you. And after the pomp and pageantry of day one, it is, of course, time to get down to business on day two, with trade talks planned between President Trump and outgoing Prime Minister Theresa May. But critics suggest any deal that's made will not be good for the United Kingdom. What's being said about that?
Well, the form this morning is a business meeting. Business leaders from the sort of 5 leading British companies, 5 leading American companies, President Trump, Theresa May, will be hosting that meeting at St. James's Palace. That gets underway in about an hour's time. Companies like Boeing, like Lockheed Martin, GlaxoSmithKline will be there as well. So this is a meeting where Theresa May wants to promote the improvement in business relations between the two countries. She'll say that, you know, trade is good, but we want to improve trade. This is sort of largely symbolic, but it's important. Perhaps some more substantive conversations about what trade may look like in the future between Britain and the United States will come in a closed-door meeting between Theresa May, President Trump, and their cabinets as well. There is no one-on-one meeting. But the concerns in Britain at the moment are, you know, what would a free trade arrangement with the United States look like? Once Britain is out of the European Union, it loses the sort of power of being in that bigger economic trading group, and it will perhaps be more open to leverage from the United States, leverage into things like Britain's National Health Service, which would cause a great deal of concern here. In Britain, health treatment is free for people. It's really something that people believe in and want and would not like to surrender. Sort of, it would be politically difficult for the government to give up something like that. And the notion that that's a possibility, it would be a very difficult political notion. But of course, free trade agreements take a long time. We're a long way away from any of those sorts of details becoming real.
Indeed. And James Boyes, let's go to you. We just want to listen to the Queen's toast to the US President, where she talks about the importance of traditional allies and post-war international institutions. Let's just listen to that.
After the shared sacrifices of the Second World War, Britain and the United States worked with other allies to build an assembly of international institutions to ensure that the horrors of conflict would never be repeated. While the world has changed, we are forever mindful of the original purpose of these structures, nations working together to safeguard a hard-won peace.
So, James Boyes, was the Queen sending a pointed but diplomatic message to the US President to remember traditional allies, not forsake them, as some critics suggest he's doing?
Yes, I think so. It bears remembering, of course, that whilst today the President will be in central London meeting with the Prime Minister, tomorrow he and the Queen will be in Portsmouth commemorating the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings. And I think that that event, combined with Her Majesty's remarks last night, will be very much used to try and reinforce the message from London to Washington, that multinational organizations such as NATO, for example, are very much worth preserving moving forward, especially considering the allegations with regard to Donald Trump and Russia, for example. So I think that was very much the message coming out of the speech last night at Buckingham Palace.
And, Nick, as well as the trade talks, protests are planned for today, and all of this in the midst of political parties divided and unable to find a path to Brexit. How is President Trump making these divisions work for him at this time?
Certainly, he really wants to see Britain out of the European Union. He said that he supports Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson will make a good Prime Minister. He says Boris Johnson has already put his cards on the table with Brexit and the way that he would negotiate it, talking about possibly leaving the European Union on 31st of October without a deal. And of course, the political opposition in Britain here is really playing this at the moment to show that a hard Brexiteer like Boris Johnson will be very close to President Trump, so anything negative negative about President Trump is therefore reflected negatively on the Conservative Party and Boris Johnson or any other leader who might take over. So no surprise today that Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, is joining the protesters at Trafalgar Square later today, where he will be giving a speech. He also didn't go to the state banquet last night, even though he had an invitation. And I think all this tells you are the sort of the deep political strains in Britain at the moment, the way that the Labour Party, the opposition party, is trying to sort of play the Conservative Party as closely aligned with President Trump, and that is a bad thing. Witness concerns over the health service, future trade relationships, etc. So that's the way those divisions are playing out with President Trump's visit at the moment, Rosemary.
And James Boyes, before even arriving in the UK, President Trump had already waded into the political fray, hadn't he? Making it clear he supports Boris Johnson, as Nick just reported, supported Boris as the next British Prime Minister, of course. Is Mr. Trump putting the special relationship between the US and the UK under threat, as some critics have suggested?
No, I don't think so. I understand why people make that conclusion, but people have been writing off the special relationship, quite frankly, since it first began. What we're seeing now, I think, is an example of just how important that special relationship is to both nations. It's in the interests of both London and Washington that a favourable trade deal is struck. It would do great kudos to Donald Trump as president, as well as to any future prime minister to be able to announce a favourable trade deal. But of course, British hands are tied effectively until Brexit has been secured, and really any negotiations and discussions which take place today in Downing Street are going to be pretty superficial, I think. The real negotiations and hard work will be done very much behind the scenes in talks, which I doubt will receive an awful lot of coverage. And that probably won't happen, of course, now until after Theresa May has left office and been replaced by an as yet unknown Prime Minister.
Right. Yes, the timing of this state visit, of course, a little difficult, isn't it, with Theresa May leaving in just a matter of days. James Boyes, thank you so much for joining us from London, and Nick Robertson from the front of 10 Downing Street, also in London. Many thanks to you both.